Yeah, thank you all. It feels so good to be called President Lai. Okay. Just like my previous moderator, he said that when you're stepping on the stage, you feel lonely and awkward. Because all my fellow panelists, they are 1,000 miles away, and I just could not have eye contact with all of them. So yes, I feel awkward. But I think that these sessions is actually touch upon a very important topic, which concern all of us, the stability and turmoil of the Taiwan, the security across the Taiwan Straits. I think we all know that the PRC has never given up using force to settle the disputes with us. But I think in the last several years that the threat from China, especially military harassment, has increased in a significant degree. And beginning this year, I think their military harassment actually has doubled or even tripled in terms of the capability, the frequency, the energy. And so what we are seeing here is that the security issues in Taiwan Straits or the near Taiwan Straits right now become the hot topic of discussions. And we also see that the United States, facing the increasing threat from China, also increases support for Taiwan. And thus the activity across the Taiwan Strait or the nearest Taiwan Strait or proximity across the Taiwan Straits is very rampant, basically. And so here, I think it concerns all of us. And we have 4 distinguished panelists for us to discuss the issues. We have panelists from Japan, from United States, from Australia, and from France. Considering the time in France, you know that how busy and how industrial they have to be. Oh, so all of them are here. Good to see all of you. So, hello, please say hi to everyone and also to the audience here. Good. Yeah. So
hi,
without
everyone.
further ado, I will hold on. I will introduce all of you, and then I will ask the first panelist to speak. The 4 distinguished panelists. The first one is the member House of Representatives Karen Makishima from Japan, and the second panelist is Dr. Daniel Russell from the United States. He was the former Assistant Secretary of State for the East Asian Affairs and also the Senior Advisor at National Security Council in the Obama administration. And the third, I'm sorry to say that we should be expecting Dr. Paul Monk, but unfortunately, Dr. Paul Monk right now, he is a little bit ill, so that we are fortunate to have his able assistant, Dr. Declan Sullivan, yes. And then the last but not the least is our dear friend Antoine Bandas, and he right now the time in Paris probably is about like 5:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, right, or 5:30 in the morning. So that we'll appreciate for him to get up this really early. So without further ado, Your Honorable Karen Makishima, please, for you to speak.
Thank you very much for organizing Katagalon Forum 2020 Asia Pacific Security Dialogue. I'm Karen Makishima, member of House of Representatives, Japan. Today I'm attending this event as head of International Section, Youth Division of Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. It is a great honor to be part of this forum. First of all, I would like to express our deepest sympathies to the passing of President Lee Teng-hui. President Lee has made a great contribution to the promotion of goodwill and friendship between Japan and Taiwan. President Lee has always treated Japan with a special mind and has also established freedom, democracy, human rights, and universal values in Taiwan. At the same time, he has built a foundation for Japan-Taiwan relations, and many Japanese people have special friendliness. For condolences, I visited Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in Japan, and there I vow to continue to strengthen the relationship between Taiwan and Japan. Here I would like to talk about the history of the LDP, Liberal Democratic Party Youth Division in Taiwan. In 1967, when President Chiang Ching-kuo visited Japan as the chief of China Youth Corps, he suggested exchanges between young generations, and since then, LDP Youth Division has been the counterpart of Taiwan. Around the country, local lawmakers and civilians under the age of 45 act as LDP Youth Division, and every year we visit Taiwan for training. I am very sorry that we cannot visit Taiwan this year because of COVID-19. In various countries, we respond to COVID-19, but Taiwan's movements have also attracted attention in Japan. Your high-risk management capabilities are highly regarded. In Japan, many say that it is strange that Taiwan cannot participate in WHO, even though infectious diseases are borderless issues. In Japan, the shortage of medical supplies, such as masks, became a problem, while in Taiwan, visualization and reservation sales system of masks were in progress. There were many opinions at the LDP meetings that we should follow the Taiwanese model. I regret that digitalization has not progressed in Japanese medical field. This time, we finally switched to digital input for the infectious report from handwriting and faxing. The Japanese people were deeply impressed by Minister Audrey Tan's comment when building a system in Tokyo. We are also grateful for the donation of medical masks and protective clothing. I feel the friendship of Taiwan that always supports us in times of need, including natural disasters. With COVID-19 experiences, we feel that we are facing the new challenge of managing information and promoting digitalization while respecting the value of protective individual freedom, privacy, and democracy. Now we face the question whether to choose an authoritarian state monitoring digital society or a human rights-based digital society based on the rule of freedom, democracy, and the law. With the arrival of digital transformation and a data-driven society, important issues are emerging not only for the economy but also for security. The United States is still a big player in terms of Asia-Pacific security. A reduced U.S. commitment to Taiwan's security would accelerate China's growing relative power in the Taiwan Strait, potentially increasing the risk of armed conflict. U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar visited Taiwan, making the highest level visit by a U.S. official in 4 decades. Azar said in his statement, Taiwan has been a model of transparency and cooperation in global health during the COVID-19 pandemic and long before it. He also criticized China's response to the outbreak, saying, China should have disclosed more information and be more transparent. Also in the US, there was a series of Chinese speeches by the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, FBI Director Chris Wray, and the Attorney General Barr. Ambassador O'Brien said in his address in Czech, what's happening now isn't Cold War 2.0. The challenge of resisting the CCP threat is in some ways much more difficult. Even in Japan, the headline, Pompeo says, China is a greater threat to the globe than Russia was during the Cold War, gave us a great impact. So far, we feel the strong support to Taiwan from President Trump administration, but this year is an election year for the U.S. presidency, so we need to watch carefully on the issue of Asia-Pacific security. The security area extends from land, sea, and air to space and cyber. Today, I would like to thank how security issue changes while we live in the digital society. I don't think it is realistic for a Japanese company to build a huge platformer like GAFA in the US or Baidu in China. However, in global data hegemony, I think there are some points Japan should lead, such as the creation of international rules for data distribution. At the 2019 G20 Osaka Summit, we established the Osaka Track under the framework of DFFT, Data Free Flow with Trust. We would like to lead the efforts of DFFT, which is fully committed to protecting personal information. Trust should be the key within any frameworks between nations, the private sectors, and between people and the nations. Some countries have already taken advantage of surveillance technology to effectively manage and control citizens and to obtain privacy information instead of providing platform or services. However, we would like to aim at societies that encourage changes by behavior by sharing information rather than strictly monitoring, even if it takes time to form consensus. Furthermore, it is necessary to continue to create a model that innovation to support people's lives can occur in liberal democratic countries and not in countries that ignore human rights and privacy. The high-tech hegemony race between the United States and China is accelerating. The high-tech hegemony of China extends to the information and communications and currencies that have been regarded as hegemony of the United States. We are entering the era of economic security where the economy and security are closely linked. In Japan, on April the 1st this year, the National Security Secretariat NSS Economic Division was established. It is response to China's economic statecraft, which affects the diplomacy and business activities of other countries through economical means. There is a sense of caution that Japanese companies with advanced technology may be cheaply acquired by Chinese companies due to the sharp drop in stock prices accompanying the spread of COVID-19. In order to prevent the outflow of technology that can be used for military purposes, it is necessary to quickly grasp and manage the information of the companies that have technologies such as artificial intelligence (AI) and quantum technology. NSS Economic Division will become a commanding tower for issues related to the economy and security. TikTok is also a big topic. It is used by over 10 million people in Japan. The United States points out that entertainment apps that dance to music pose a security threat. They are wary of leaking personal information of Americans to the Chinese government if they use Chinese apps. The Japanese parliament has not yet revised the law, but there are arguments that it may be necessary to keep pace with the movements of the international community. Specifically, there is a proposal to add to the law that it is necessary to consider the risk of economic security when using the application. In addition, since there are many tourists from China in Japan, we have introduced WeChat Pay and Alipay at restaurants and souvenir shops, but it is intended for inbound people from China, and it is not supposed to be used by Japanese people. We are also paying attention to the Thousand Talents Plan (TTP) established by China. Although the US too boasts a high share in clinical medicine and basic life sciences, China aims to become the world's top science and technology powerhouse by attracting excellent human resources from overseas. We should think that they are actively approaching Japanese scientists, researchers, and engineers. Some collaborative research is funded by Chinese research funds. Some of them are closely linked to military and defense. Discussions have already started that universities should have a department that controls the export of high-tech technology. We should be careful about the future of Hong Kong. After the enforcement of the Hong Kong national security law, internet-related companies in the United States and South Korea have begun to move from Hong Kong to other regions or shut down servers that store data. Global Financial Centers Index showed this year Hong Kong has fallen its ranking as the financial hub from 3rd to 6th. In order from the first place, it is New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Beijing. To establish the biggest financial hub in Asia, Tokyo is trying to attract foreign human resources from Hong Kong in specialized and technical fields such as financial groups. Singapore is a rival, but the LDP is preparing for it by arranging hearings from Japanese experts working in Hong Kong. In this way, the theme of security is expanding from the conventional movements of land, sea, and air to the less visible ones, such as information and technology. Today, I wanted to share the idea that we should be more aware of our approach through economic activities and digital transformation. Especially in the era of post-COVID-19, supply chains are reviewed and new innovations will be promoted. Therefore, we Taiwan and Japan, who share the values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, should form global rules and cooperate with each other. I think that will become more important in the post-COVID-19 society. Lastly, I have to mention that in Japan, we are now in the middle of presidential election of LDP. Since today is the first day of this election, I'm very sorry that I have to leave early. Today, I cannot answer to your questions, but I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honorable Dr. Makishima. I know you are very busy and you have your other obligation to fill, so that you need to leave early. But I also thank you for touching upon a very wide range of issues, from the security across the Taiwan Strait, Chinese aggression, to the health issue, as well as Japan's role in combating the COVID-19, as well as Japan's role in advancing the digital safety issue in the whole world. So next, I'd like to invite Dr. Daniel Russell, former Assistant Secretary of State for the East Asian Affairs, United States, and former Senior Director for the Asia National Security Council. Right now, Dr. Daniel Russell, he's the Vice President for International Security and Diplomacy, Asia Society Policy Institute. Yes, Daniel?
Thank you very much, President Lai. I'm honored to participate in the Ketagalan Forum, and frankly, I look forward to the day when the United States gets a better grip on COVID-19, so Taiwan will allow me to visit again in person. You mentioned that I worked in the White House, the National Security Council, and in the State Department. I'm very proud of what the United States and Taiwan have been able to achieve during the time that I was in government. And like so many Americans, I find the vitality of Taiwan's democracy and its impressive success in managing the COVID pandemic as great sources of admiration. So, turmoil across the Taiwan Strait. In my experience, there's always been a correlation between US-China relations and cross-strait relations. And I think that we can probably all agree that these two sets of relationships are right now both in pretty bad shape. The starting point, of course, is the worsening security threat from the PRC. That's driven, of course, by its declared objective of reunification and its refusal to renounce the use of force to achieve it. So Beijing makes no secret of its goal to incorporate Taiwan under terms that are similar to those for Hong Kong. And we now know that to be effectively one country, one system. That would put an end to Taiwan's autonomy and Taiwan's democracy. So it means that Taiwan faces a special set of challenges in balancing its open democratic society at the same time that it's protecting its security. My observation is that Beijing's tactics are a mix of intimidation and pressure, psychological warfare, and also co-option. It's a sort of gamble in a way, a gamble that over time Taiwan's will to resist may falter. It's as if the Chinese leadership is betting that distrust and division within Taiwan's politics will sap its ability to cope with an increasingly powerful China. And it's easy to see that Beijing is using various tools to keep Taiwan on the defensive and to try to wear down its confidence, suspending cross-strait dialogue and engagement, snatching away Taiwan's remaining diplomatic allies, marginalizing or excluding Taiwan in the international system, creating difficulties for some Taiwan companies, hiring away talent, pressuring US and French and other companies and governments over how to refer to Taiwan on maps, on websites, and documents. Of course, there are the military exercises and PLA incursions into the areas around Taiwan and restricting PRC students from studying in Taiwan or tourists from visiting. But the strategy is not just hardening the hard, it's also softening the soft. So we see inducements, we see purchases of Taiwan agriculture or other products from certain favored regions. We see special treatment for cooperative Taiwan businesses and entrepreneurs. And we've also seen a variety of ways that Beijing tries to manipulate Taiwan politics through cyber activities, United Front actions, social media, purchasing or influencing traditional media, funneling disguised money to political organizations. Now, in my experience, Beijing consistently blames the United States for blocking unification and encouraging separatism by doing things like selling arms to Taiwan. And it's certainly true that successive US administrations have supported Taiwan in order to ensure that it doesn't have to negotiate with the mainland under duress. And it's true that the United States doesn't want to see Taiwan coerced into accepting Beijing's rule and in abandoning its autonomy and political freedoms. But the reason Beijing has not made progress towards reconciliation, let alone unification, isn't the US role. The reason is its own refusal to adapt its policy to Taiwan's political reality, to what the people on Taiwan want and what they would accept. Now, there's been a number of politically significant developments in US-Taiwan relations so far this year since President Tsai's re-election in January. H.R. McMaster touched on a few, but not all. Vice President-elect Lai's visit to the US in early February, the face-to-face meeting between the Taiwan National Security Advisor and the latest US National Security Advisor in May, passage by Congress of the Taipei Act, the sale of new F-16V Falcon fighter jets that President Tsai mentioned, last month's visit to Taipei by Cabinet Secretary Alex Azar, the agreement by TSMC to build a semiconductor fabrication plant in the United States, that's big. And President Tsai's recent decision to ease restrictions on the import of US beef and pork after all this time. And it's no coincidence that in the same period, politically motivated military signaling activities around Taiwan by the PRC, by the United States, have increased significantly as well. So the tempo of the PLA's Air Force and Navy incursions across the median line has accelerated significantly. This is a very worrisome sort of new normal. PLA naval and air forces conducted large-scale joint drills, as has been mentioned. And the United States has conducted multiple transits of the Taiwan Strait. We did that during the Obama administration, but the difference is now that the White House draws conspicuous attention to the transits by publicizing them. So I think we have to acknowledge the risk that Taiwan is being drawn into US-China strategic competition. President Tsai, I think very wisely pointed out last month that in light of deteriorating US-China relations, Taiwan mustn't yield to pressure from Beijing, but it shouldn't act rashly because of Washington's support either. That makes sense. The context here is that in the last few months, the Trump administration has significantly ratcheted up its rhetoric and its actions against China. President Trump has suspended his focus on the trade deficit. He's stopped heaping praise on Xi Jinping. And instead, he's been railing about the China flu. And he's given the green light to his team to move aggressively against China in a variety of areas and on a variety of issues that he chose to ignore for most of his term. So it's no secret that this is connected to his campaign strategy, deflecting blame, creating an external enemy. That's the new priority now that the economy and the pandemic have undercut his re-election strategy. But frankly, Taiwan's friends in the US national security community are concerned because what may be politically expedient during the US presidential campaign won't necessarily benefit Taiwan in the longer term. And there's a risk of miscalculation that can have unintended and adverse consequences for Taiwan. But what's particularly troubling to us is to think that these demonstrations of support for Taiwan may not be politically so useful after the election is over. So then what? We just heard earlier from General McMaster, who was one of the 4 so far national security advisors to President Trump for just over 1 year. He never mentioned the president's name in his prepared remarks. But we can't overlook the fact that his own replacement as National Security Advisor, John Bolton, highlighted this very concern in the book that he published. So if support for Taiwan is largely a tactical tool against Beijing, you've got to ask, in a second term, if there's a deal made with Xi Jinping, what kind of change is that going to bring about to US policy? So the significance for cross-strait security in the future is that Beijing's strategy isn't just based on undermining Taiwan's resistance. It's also a gamble on how the US will approach the cross-strait issue. It's a gamble on US decline and the inevitable shift in the quote-unquote correlation of forces, as the Marxists like to describe it. So some of Beijing's new confidence is based on the objective fact that its comprehensive military strength has increased significantly in recent years. It's not just the surge in defense spending, not just PLA modernization, but it also includes things like new systems, the missiles that can target US aircraft carriers or US bases in Guam and Japan, for example. But the strongest driver of increased Chinese assertiveness is the conviction that the Western system and the United States in particular is in decay, is in decline. And worryingly, this view is reinforced by what Beijing thinks it's seen in the United States in recent years, the abandonment of alliances, the withdrawal from multilateral agreements and institutions, the catastrophic mishandling of the COVID virus and the ensuing economic crisis, the political polarization and the political gridlock, racial injustice, wealth gaps, breakdown of social order. Now, in light of the situation in the United States, it seems like hubris for an American like me to make suggestions about how to improve cross-strait security, but hey, hubris is very American, so here it goes. I think for the United States, to put it very simply, we have to get our own act together, not only in support of cross-strait stability, but more broadly for the region. We have to deal with COVID-19. We have to work to heal our social divisions. We have to reopen our own borders again to international talent. We have to restore faith in America's commitment to its founding values, its commitment, its loyalty to its allies and partners. The People's Republic of China is a Leninist system. The Chinese Communist Party is a Leninist party that respects power and that has contempt for weakness. So there is no substitute for the United States regaining its authentic national strength. And for Taiwan, I think that intensifying pressure from Beijing requires that Taipei respond by advancing the economic reforms needed to attract foreign investment, as both President Tsai and Makishima Sensei pointed out. Economy and security are inextricably connected. By making the trade-offs required to achieve closer economic ties with partners like the United States and others, by increasing Taiwan's budget for its national security, including cybersecurity, as Makishima Sensei pointed out, and with a heavy focus on an effective asymmetric defense capabilities, as President Tsai mentioned. And lastly, by continuing to demonstrate that a government of the people, for the people, and by the people can function and does function effectively on Taiwan. So I think my time is up, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for your remarks. I believe that you also included in your remarks about the recent critique of the U.S. government as well as the situation surrounding the Taiwan Strait, including Chinese government. So next, I'd like to invite, unfortunately and fortunately, that Dr. Sullivan, who will be here to be in place of the Dr. Paul Monk and read his remarks. So Dr. Sullivan, it's yours.
Not a doctor, not yet anyway. That's just Declan. It's an honor to be here to address you on behalf of Dr. Monk, and I hope I do his thoughts and opinions justice. So many years ago, at a forum similar to this one in Taipei, Dr. Monk advanced an argument that a paradigm shift was necessary in the international order. In particular, he argued that contrary to long-standing CCP policy, it would be in China's national interest to freely offer Taiwan de jure independence and reassurances that it would not be invaded or forced to accept integration within the PRC or rule from Beijing. On that occasion, the veteran China scholar Edward Friedman, who was in the audience, remarked that that's a great idea, Paul, but it will never happen. Dr. Monk responded that no one could know that. What we could be more certain of was that if no such idea was developed or advanced, then the chances of it ever happening would be radically diminished. Given the disposition of the Xi Jinping regime, it might well be thought that such a prospect is further away than ever in 2020. Xi has been openly threatening the use of force against Taiwan, and the party has revised its law on this matter to indicate that such force might be used not only in the event that Taiwan declares independence, but if it simply refuses to accept peaceful reunification on Beijing's terms. The crackdown in Hong Kong, the regime of total surveillance and one-man dictatorship that we're currently seeing in China, the wolf warrior diplomacy of the PRC Foreign Service and media, all appear to reinforce this gloomy assessment. The question, however, is not whether these are current realities, but how we should respond to them. Dr. Monk's answer is that it is precisely these realities that make his proposition more urgent and relevant than it was 15 or 20 years ago. In his book, Thunder from the Silent Zone, Rethinking China, published in 2005, he wrote, developing ideas that he advanced in Taipei earlier, and I quote, "Paradigms are ways of construing reality rooted in certain fundamental assumptions. A shift occurs when it is found or decided that one or more of those assumptions is at best questionable. Most analysis of the Taiwan problem proceeds from a small number of largely unexamined assumptions. Chief among these is that China will never resile from its claim to sovereignty over Taiwan, but also, and crucially, that it has a right to such sovereignty, and that it would be humiliated or would suffer a loss of prestige should it fail to insist on recovering this sovereignty. If the present impasse is to ever be intelligently resolved, without the people of Taiwan being forced to accept Chinese sovereignty they do not want, these assumptions need rethinking. There seems to be a very widespread assumption that rethinking them is either impossible or pointless because they are simply the unalterable realities of the case. That assumption is false," end quote. Dr. Monk then used the example of the famous Necker cube as a model or metaphor showing how perceptions can be illusory and can be shifted without changing any of the relevant facts, just the perceptions. Next slide, please. This is the Necker cube. The Necker cube is an optical illusion first pointed out in 1832 by Swiss crystallographer Louis Albert Necker. It is a simple wireframe drawing of a cube with no visual cues as to its orientation, so it can be interpreted to have either the upper left, yellow, or the lower right, mostly blue square, as its frontmost side. The red dot can be seen as sitting either in the upper front right or the lower rear right corner, depending on one's perception of the cube. Neither perception is intrinsically correct. Each is possible. Once you grasp the optical illusion, you experience the way in which the same facts can be seen differently, depending on one's perspective. Dr. Monk suggests that we use this mental model in thinking through the matter of China's domineering attitude towards Taiwan. 3 fixed ideas govern the strategic thinking about Taiwan by fatalists and pro-China analysts. Firstly, that Taiwan is an inalienable part of a state called China governed from the mainland. Secondly, that no state called China and governed from the mainland will ever accept the independence of Taiwan. And thirdly, that Taiwan is a vital asset in geostrategic competition between China and the United States. Both the first and second propositions bear heavily on the third, and have never done so more than they do right now, with Xi Jinping in power in China and Donald Trump in the White House, and a US presidential election 2 months away. Here is the paradox, however. China's threat to use force to compel Taiwan to accept absorption into the PRC, due to the linkage seen between these 3 propositions, reinforces Sino-American competition and drives Taiwan into the arms of the United States, which in turn stirs nationalism, fear, and indignation in mainland China. The irony in this situation is that the only way to break this deadlock, draw Taiwan closer to China, and put an end to the danger of a catastrophic war in East Asia over Taiwan, is for China to reassure the people of Taiwan that it is a genuine friend and protector of the island, and not a menacing hegemon. A Taiwan that trusted Beijing and felt secure as a trading state in East Asia would, by that very fact, cease to arm itself against China or feel the need to remain a client state of the United States. Taiwan, as a large version of Singapore, would be a fine state in East Asia. In equipoise between China, Japan, and the United States, it would pose a threat to none of them and could flourish as a trading state with deep historical and economic ties to all three. It would cease to be a source of historical tension or geopolitical rivalry. In fact, Taiwan is a larger version of Singapore and is a fine state in East Asia. Next slide, please. Acknowledging this would show wisdom in Beijing, but to bring about such wisdom requires a neck cube shift in perceptions in Beijing. The argument for such a shift is similar in nature to Jiwei Zi's argument in his 2019 book, Democracy in China, The Coming Crisis. It is a realist argument, not an empty-headed idealist one. It is a realist argument for several reasons. Taiwan is already a flourishing trading state with deep historical ties to China, Japan, and the United States. It doesn't need to get to that condition in order to be viable. And it doesn't need to establish independence from Beijing because it already is and always has been independent from the PRC and has done very well for itself as an independent trading state. Launching a war against Taiwan in order to compel its absorption into the PRC would be a disaster for China and could trigger a larger-scale war in the Pacific, which would be a disaster for everyone and potentially catastrophic. A China that was attracting states to itself rather than having them fearful and reluctantly banding together against it would be in far better placed than an aggressive China to take a position as a global leader, whether alongside America or slowly and peacefully assuming primacy. It is unrealistic of the PRC to expect that the people of Taiwan will choose to accept absorption into the PRC and dictatorship from Beijing. It is unrealistic of the communist leadership to think that the use of force against Taiwan can have a good or constructive outcome. And it is unrealistic of the Chinese ruling class to think that the world will look to China for leadership if it acts, and as it is currently acting, as a dictatorial bully in Hong Kong and against Taiwan. Dr. Monk suggests that the case for a radical rethinking of China's territorial claim and sovereignty claim to Taiwan is realist in the same way that Jiwei Zi's case for democracy in the PRC is realist. The two ideas, of course, are closely related. His book, Democracy in China, The Coming Crisis, was published in 2019 by Harvard University Press, even as the crackdown and draconian national security legislation were imposed on Hong Kong, putting an end to any realistic possibility of Taiwan accepting a one-country, two-systems deal with the PRC for itself. Xi opens his book with the statement, and I quote, "A major shift in intellectual opinion has occurred in China regarding the relevance and appropriateness of democracy under China's current circumstances and given its tradition. I am tempted to call this shift a sea change given its swelling proportions and potentially far-reaching consequences," end quote. He went on to argue that the hyper-surveillance and indoctrination measures put in place under Xi are not signs of stability and security of the party, but of its tenuous grip on legitimacy and its lack of confidence in its future. They are symptoms, Xi argues, of a legitimation crisis that is only a constitutional democratic order can relieve. He foresees growing institutional and social pressures for such an order to be brought into being. You will appreciate that in a short address like this argument can't be expanded upon. There is, however, a parallel between domestic politics in the PRC and geopolitics across the Taiwan Strait. In both cases, the logic of the situation points to the need and the possibility of conceptual and practical breakthroughs. Breakthroughs which would, at long last, initiate actual constitutional democratic governance in China and which would ratify generously the reality of Taiwan's freedom and self-determination as a model of constitutional democratic governance in the Chinese world. Next slide, thank you. We all know that the logic of a situation by no means leads to constructive breakthroughs. it can instead lead to irrational and destructive acts. Lowering probability of such irrational and destructive resistance is the task of leadership and vision. Leadership in Beijing at the present moment is moving in a dark and ominous direction. But that is no reason for the rest of us to cast reason or vision to the winds or become demoralised. All those years ago, when Ed Friedman declared that Dr. Monk had proposed will never happen, Dr. Monk remarked that in 1984, if he had said that within 5 years the Eastern Bloc would have ceased to exist due to peaceful democratic revolutions, or had he stated in 1986 that within 5 years the Soviet Union itself would have ceased to exist, or if he had stated in 1989 that within 5 years the apartheid regime of South Africa would have peacefully and voluntarily dismantled itself, and that Nelson Mandela would be free, Dr. Monk would assuredly have been laughed at in almost any forum. If, finally, he had predicted in 1994, within 5 years, East Timor would have been allowed a referendum and would have chosen independence and would be led by a freed Xanana Gusmao, who would have called that anything but a fairy tale. Yet all these things happened in those 5-year timeframes. As such, the case must be made that a better future for China will entail not the forceful subjugation of Taiwan, but the generous recognition of Taiwan by Beijing as an independent state within a prospering East Asia. That better future for China will be one which is admired and trusted around the world, rather than distrusted and feared. That better future for China will be the one of a responsible and democratic transition within the PRC itself, of the kind outlined by GYZ. And a better future for China would be a better future for the rest of us. For, make no mistake, we in Australia have growing concerns about China under Xi Jinping. Yet we have everything to gain from a better future for China. Those two things are now drawing us closer to Taiwan. The hope in this regard is not an alliance and a war against China, which no one wants. It is solidarity in the long game that is the transformation of China into a vast, prosperous, and democratic polity with which friendship and trade are unproblematic. Next slide, thank you. Almost 20 years ago, Dr. Monk visited Taiwan to observe the elections that took place on the 1st of December 2001. The day following the election, there was a conference at the Grand Hotel where he was staying. The DPP's final campaign rally had been held at the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Holding. This post-election conference at the Grand Hotel was almost as significant, since it had been built long before for Madame Chiang Kai-shek, one of the great dragon ladies of Chinese history, like the Empress Dowager. The conference's keynote speaker was Madame Tsai Ing-wen, then the director of the Mainland Affairs Council. Not a dragon lady, but a fully modern and most impressive person. She spoke of how the new DPP government would be committed first and foremost to responsibility, stability, and flexibility in both domestic and cross-strait affairs. Dr. Monk was deeply impressed by her clarity and diction and evident abundance of intelligence, and wrote so in the Australian Financial Review a few days later. Next slide, thank you. There has been, in short, enormous progress in Taiwan over time. There has been enormous progress in China over time, but it has trailed behind Taiwan both economically and politically. Our primary effort over the next 5 years must be to advance the vision of a future for China and its place in the world at variance with the ominous vision being forwarded by Xi Jinping. As Xia Xia of the Party Central School itself remarked recently, Xi is leading China towards a crisis. We all need that crisis to be averted, not in a merely conservative way by clinging to compromised and unstable status quos, but through the transformation of institutions and visions in geopolitics. It would be foolish for us to stake out our position and then blithely assume that it can be left to happen as a matter of course, or that it will prevail because of its logic and generosity. There is a possibility that Xi will move militarily against Taiwan, and that possibility does need to be thwarted. The point has been made by a number of figures around the world in the past couple of years that, as historical analogies go, the PRC's assertion of territorial sovereignty over the South China Sea might be likened to Hitler's annexation of the Rhineland in 1936 and the crackdown in Hong Kong to the Anschluss in Austria in 1937, and the threat to Taiwan like Hitler's demands on Czechoslovakia in 1938. Next slide, thank you. The Munich analogy is not without merit. Taiwan must not be abandoned to the ruthlessness being trumpeted by Beijing, and there is serious danger either that it will be, as Czechoslovakia was abandoned by the Western powers in 1938, or that miscalculations and nationalist jingoism in China will lead to a war from which no one, whatever the outcome of the conflict, will emerge better off. Now, is the Munich analogy overdrawn or misleading? Is it lurid to compare Xi Jinping to Hitler? Those questions are themselves misleading. The point of the analogy is not to suggest precise comparisons, but to point out the kind of situation we now face. In that sense, it is not overdrawn. And if it serves to alert us to the need of a radically different outcome this time, it will have served us well. Czechoslovakia in 1938 was a robust industrial democracy with free press and an impressive defence force. It was abandoned to its fate, and instead of ameliorating the strategic situation in Europe, that betrayal made it much worse. Taiwan today has in spades all of the characteristics that Czechoslovakia had. Socially and politically, it is a shining example of what is possible in China, and what we should all be articulating those better possibilities by all means. While conscious that what that was being done for years by the Democratic Party in Hong Kong and is now being ground under the heel of Beijing. We have a future to bring into being. We have just been reminded by the grim events in Hong Kong that it will not come into being automatically. It is nonetheless what we ought to stand together to work for, and it holds out hope and goodwill to China, not enmity. Note that I say China and not the Chinese Communist Party or Xi Jinping and his ruling clique. What's to say what the world will look like 5 years from now? Let's not simply wait and see. Let's generate this possibility for Taiwan and China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you to be in place for Dr. Paul Monk, and I think you eloquently demonstrated what Paul Monk's point. That is the issue about the Taiwan Strait is actually the problem about China, not the problem about Taiwan. So next, I'd like to invite Dr. Antoine Badaz, also a good friend of mine, from Paris. So I know you'll wait for a long time, and it's still very early in Paris. So yeah, finally it's yours. So please, Antoine.
Thank you very much. It is indeed an honor and a great pleasure to be joining this panel today. I would like first to thank the organizer, the INDSR and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for this 2020 Katagalan Asia-Pacific Security Dialogue. And before starting, I would also like to pay my respect and condolences to President Lee Teng-hui, Mr. Democracy. In addition, despite the COVID-19 pandemics, we are today together more than ever, and as one says, being apart actually teaches us how to be together. It is also a great responsibility not only to speak after three excellent panelists under the supervision of an excellent moderator, President Lai, but also to provide a European perspective. And I know well expectations are very high after the very successful visits of our Czech friends to Taiwan. And as a French, being this early morning in Italy and not in Paris, and as a member of the broader Team Europe, I will do my utmost. Too often, either the European Union and the European Union member states are not considered as security actors in the Taiwan Strait, or they consider themselves they should stay above the fray of security dynamics in the region. Yet, the European Union and the European Union member states have key interests in promoting and sustaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Even more so since political tensions and military threats are on the rise. And indeed, Europeans do care about Taiwan. Taiwan does matter for Europeans. There is an awakening in Europe on the importance of Taiwan, and there is an awakening in Taiwan on the support from Europe. In that very short presentation, I will argue that while we should be aware of our own limitations, of course, it is urgent for the European Union and its member states to transition from being passive observers to more active players, and to adopt a more coordinated and comprehensive strategy of credible commitments to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. From a European traditional perspective, Taiwan is first and foremost a trade and economic partner, and rightly so. Trade between the EU and Taiwan has increased more than eightfold over the past 2 decades. The EU is Taiwan's fourth trade partner, and Taiwan is the EU's seventh largest trade partner in Asia, and the island, that is very important, the island's largest source of foreign investment. The very name of the EU's office in Taiwan, along with the existing offices from 15 out of 27 member states, the European Economic and Trade Office, is quite heavy. Yet, economics is not the only cement of Europe-Taiwan relations. And indeed, not only are peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait crucial for this trade and economic relations to flourish, but Taiwan is a key partner in many other fields, including research, climate change, and education, and even more important, a like-minded democracy Europeans share value. Maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is a key interest for the European Union and the member states. And since we have interest, we must defend them. A military conflict in the Taiwan Strait indeed would entail heavy humanitarian consequences, tremendous economic disruptions, and would embolden authoritarian regimes to act aggressively in strict violation of international law. On the one hand, there is a late and slow awakening in Europe and an end of a form of strategic narcissism regarding China. The idea that the Chinese political regime and economic system would gradually evolve and better fit our expectations. Europeans are no longer naive. I think it has been repeated at the EU and at the national level. Perceptions of China are deteriorating. Challenges posed by China are being taken care of. The EU-China relations is now officially seen as being one of the most important, but also as one of the most challenging. On the other hand, Europeans want to build a geopolitical commission, with the EU becoming a political and strategic player with one voice. As some top officials often say, the Europe of peace must also come with the Europe of power. In addition, the High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell, recently reaffirmed that, I quote, "Given everything that is happening in the world and the rise of authoritarian powers, it is important to have a strong cooperation with like-minded democracies." For sure, the EU and the member states continue and will continue to support the peaceful resolution of differences between Taipei and Beijing, and to reject the use of threat of force. We do not challenge, or we do not plan to challenge, our one China policy. We may not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but for sure we have comprehensive relations. China should not challenge our sovereign rights to visit Taiwan. Europeans will continue to visit Taiwan no matter the Chinese open threats. The more the threats, the more the incentives to visit. The more the sanctions, the more they will backfire. For sure, the European Union and the member states do not intend to replace or compete directly with existing security actors in the region that have made the Taiwan Strait stable over the last few decades. And for sure, the EU is facing intense internal debates on the nature of its international commitment, especially in the security field, with some countries pushing for the EU to be more coordinated and put the defense of European sovereignty at the top of the agenda. Yet, with all these due limitations, no one should underestimate the role Europeans can play in the security of Taiwan. Europeans want to maintain the status quo. The risk calculation should be clear. Losing Taiwan is way too costly. We must support like-minded democracies. Today, I want to argue that the EU and the member states should transition and make credible commitments to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The European Union and the member states have long been advocating for a comprehensive understanding of the key concept of security. Indeed, security should not be restricted to military security, but also cover maritime security, societal security, economic security, environmental security, and even, of course, human security. These 6 dimensions of security cover many items, from information manipulation to liberty of navigation, from diversification of global supply chains to cyber attacks, from the prevention of the next pandemic to natural disaster assistance and relief, from democratic resilience to technology sovereignty, and last but not least, to the protection of minorities, including LGBT and gender equality. In all of these dimensions, the EU and the member states can play a direct or indirect, outspoken or quiet, massive or limited role with Taiwan. This is what like-minded democracies do. To be clear, it's not only about Taiwan security or Taiwan interest. It's about our own security and our own interest. Indeed, we should never let a country feel emboldened to violate international law and unilaterally change the status quo. To do so, Europeans have leverages, yet not necessarily military leverages. Any strategy of credible commitments to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait should be acceptable, feasible, effective, flexible, and efficient, to guarantee, of course, a consensual support at the EU level, while leaving the European Union member states some room to maneuver. 5 key policy objectives should be listed. The first one, to raise awareness in Europe on the situation in the Taiwan Strait and on what is at stake. The second one, to give a voice to European and Taiwanese officials and experts. Third one, to improve a common understanding. 4, to increase cooperation and coordination at every level, and especially the civil society level. And 5, foster a new generation of young Europeans and Taiwanese to further strengthen bilateral ties. That focus on civil society is essential. We need to bridge even more than today between our 2 civil societies. I am myself a very good example of it. I first came to Taiwan as an 18-year-old exchange student and kept working on and with Taiwan ever since. What I am today advocating for is an evolution of the relations between Europe and Taiwan. Not a change in nature, but a change in substance. We need to build up on already existing initiatives while leveling up new initiatives. And here I want to take very few seconds to thank the amazing commitment to all of our diplomats, French and European ones, but also Taiwanese ones in Europe and in Taiwan. Cooperation and coordination among like-minded democracies is and will become even more important. And as an European, this is a very obvious but important statement to do. With some concrete recommendation, we can even more than today promote and sustain peace and stability, concrete recommendations that include a wide range of actors, and concrete recommendations the civil society can implement. The first one could be to strengthen our declaratory diplomacy. And Dr. Russell actually mentioned it. As mentioned also in Europe by the member of the European Parliament, Bütikofer, earlier in July, we must reaffirm publicly our support to maintaining the status quo and oppose any change in the Taiwan Strait if it's not based on the will of the Taiwanese people. Second one is to level up our parliamentary diplomacy. As illustrated during the Czech parliamentary delegation, MPs, members of parliaments, play a very important role, and we should, as soon as possible, support a joint delegation gathering MPs from different European member states, as well as a member of the European Parliament to visit Taiwan altogether. The third one should be to foster research and understanding at the national level. We need to do more about Taiwan, and we need to raise awareness. To do so, we need more dedicated research programs on Taiwan, and I'm glad that the Foundation for Strategic Research, my think tank I'm working for, will initiate actually in few days or few weeks its own Taiwan program, focusing on security and diplomacy. The fourth one is very important at the European level, is to create a European network of think tanks working on Taiwan. We need to create this kind of coalition of European think tanks that do research on Taiwan to reach a critical mass and facilitate European-wide initiatives with Taiwan. Fifth and last, we should initiate more Track 2.0 dialogue on security issues. We need to have more of this dialogue between Europe and Taiwan, and more on these security issues, such as maritime security dialogue that would also cover trade and environmental dimensions, or a global supply chain security dialogue. To succeed, Europeans need to commit even more, but Taiwan should also play an essential role in supporting it. Focus should not only be on the United States and some key partners, such as Japan and Australia, it should also include Europe. As former Vice Minister, now in Paris Ambassador Wu, has been advocating for years, and I would like to thank him for that. As I mentioned, raising awareness, giving a voice, improving a common understanding, increasing cooperation, and fostering a new generation will be essential to convince everyone that we are credibly committed to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Cooperation and coordination with like-minded democracies is the key. In her inaugural speech last January, President Tsai stressed the importance of the international community for the future of Taiwan and recommended, I quote, to consider Taiwan as a partner. More than ever, Taiwan is a key partner to Europe, and Europe is a key partner to Taiwan.
Yeah, thank you, Antoine. I think your last statement, Taiwan is a key partner of Europe, and Europe is a key partner of Taiwan. That's so true. That is so true. And thank you for your remarks. We have about 30 minutes for the Q&A. So I'd just like to open to the floor. Okay, I have seen one hand in the back. And also encourage you that since the DAI member Makishima, she has to leave early. So if you'd like to address a question to her, please do so and at your earliest. Yeah, please.
My question is for Mr. Sullivan.
Please identify yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Tim Colpin. I'm a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, based in Taipei. So, Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate you've been thrown in at the last minute. So if you want to kind of bat away my question, I won't be offended. But given the relationship between Australia and China, Australia being a middle power similar to Taiwan, I'm curious to know your opinion on Australia's economic leverage. Obviously, China is a very large trading partner, but Australia does also have a lot of resources, iron ore, for example, that China needs. I'm wondering if you can share your views on how middle powers with such resources that China needs can be used as leverage to increase their position against a very strong trading partner like China.
Okay, probably I'd like to collect probably one or two more. Anyone like to raise hand? Okay, Professor Qiu Zhaolin.
Thank you very much. Joanne Chen from Academic Sinica. I have a question for Vice President Russell. As a former Assistant Secretary, and I remember 2015, President Xi went to US and promised China has no intention to militarization of South China Sea. I wonder, did you expect to see what happened now today? And did the Obama administration could have done a little bit more at that time? Thank you.
Okay, all right, and then I will ask Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Dan Russell to answer those questions. Sullivan, please.
So how can Australia and other middle powers use resource dependencies by China where they have them? I think the answer to that question is carefully. China is very dependent on Australia's iron ore supply in particular. It also has some dependency on our coal exports, although that's declined in recent years. There's been some discussion here in Australia about how much leverage we do have, especially given China has recently started to leverage its own economic might against us in a very explicit way, bringing in some limitations on its import of our beef products, our barley, a range of other things. It is a two-way street. We can use that leverage, especially with regards to iron ore, to put some pressure, or at least have that conversation with China. The problem in Australia's case is that it is the iron ore and other mining products that we are very dependent on economically by selling to China. So as much as they are reliant on the supply of that, we are also reliant on the sale of those products. So it's a two-way street. And in Australia's case, we have been frustrated by a resistance by the Chinese Trade Ministry to meet with our officials. They've effectively blocked us out in order to discuss these issues, again, as a form of coercion. So I guess in Australia's case, it's limited. There is some dependency. If we were to turn off the tap and stop all iron ore shipments, China, I think, would struggle, at least in the short to medium term, to find viable, high-quality suppliers. But I think that would be an extreme case because it would also plunge Australia's economy into turmoil. So I think it's leverage only as much as it is can be used to start that conversation with China, to be involved in to speak with China on an equal or at least semi-equal footing. But if the Chinese are unwilling to deal or are willing to risk having those poor trade relations, then there's not a whole lot a small power, at least in Australia's case, can do, unfortunately.
Thank you, Sullivan. And Danny, would you like to answer
Sure.
the question from the Professor Qiu Zhaolin?
Yes, absolutely, Professor Chen. It's great to hear from you. I was sitting in the front row in the Rose Garden during the press conference and was startled, frankly, to hear President Xi Jinping speak those words, saying China has no intention of militarizing its outposts or the islands in the Spratlys. This was at a time when the United States and, in fact, President Obama had just been pushing quite hard on Xi Jinping, warning him that the push in the South China Sea was creating a demand signal for a greater and greater American military presence, so that the Chinese actions and strategies were having precisely the effect that China was seeking to avoid. President Obama also made it crystal clear in the private meetings with Xi Jinping that in the case of the Philippines, which was a treaty ally of the United States, and particularly in the case of the Scarborough Shoal, that China was putting itself at great risk because an incident involving the Chinese Navy or its paramilitary Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy, or frankly a civilian ship, would immediately generate a serious problem in U.S.-China relations and potentially a confrontation. And we should note that China never proceeded with plans to reclaim or build on the Scarborough Shoal. But certainly in the last 4 years, after the decision by the Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, but more to the point, after the election of President Duterte, who abandoned his predecessor's commitment to that astonishing legal victory, and instead chose to set it aside and to embrace the prospect of economic contracts with Beijing. China did, in fact, begin to militarize the outposts, which in the early stages it had claimed were just shelters for poor fishermen. Frankly, the strategy that the United States pursued of assisting the littoral countries in the region with more maritime domain awareness, more capacity to defend themselves, and in effect surrounding these tiny Chinese outposts in the Spratlys, was, I think, a very reasonable strategy, but it was completely undercut by the reversal in policy on the part of the Philippines, a critical claimant state, and a critical ASEAN nation as well. And that, combined with China's leverage over Cambodia, utterly fractured the consensus within ASEAN and created a fertile hunting ground, so to speak, in the South China Sea for the Chinese, which I'm sorry to say, a series of US Navy freedom of navigation operations hasn't been able to stop. Only a combination of military resolve and diplomatic collaboration could have a significant impact in slowing, if not stopping, the Chinese strategy of extending its reach throughout the South China Sea.
Right, thank you, Danny. Like to have a, yeah. All right, so those are two hands. First, the lady in the back, and then the next, the gentleman in front.
Thank you so much. My name is Zsuzsanna Ferenci. I am Taiwan Fellow at Academia Sinica. And normally, before moving to Taipei for a few months, I actually lived in Brussels. So I'm very happy to listen to all the interventions. And I've been working in the European Parliament for 12 years. So I can relate directly to what Antoine Bundaz shared on his views on EU-Taiwan, and observing that in Brussels, I appreciate his stressing, or your stressing, Antoine, that Taiwan matters in Europe, especially in the European Parliament. We see that, and I'm very happy to and honored to be working on that aspect of EU-Taiwan and EU-China relations. So I would appreciate if you could elaborate a little bit on your recommendations, in particular on connecting and better coordinating EU-Taiwan relations on the civil society level, as well as the youth, and how we could train the future generations. And I see that there is interest in that in Brussels, but as you said, we have to speak about the EU and member states. So I very much appreciate you always saying the EU and member states, not only just saying the EU, because we have to understand that there's this internal limitation, as you say, and fragmentation. So if you were given the task to, say, elaborate that strategy, how would you do it? Where would you start, and which member states would you in particular target? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the gentleman in the front. I believe it's Ambassador Koo.
My name is Gu, Director General of Department Policy Planning of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This morning we talked about many times about CCP. This party controlled by one person, and I said always CCP means Xi Jinping. And this party do something like infringement of sovereignty, infiltration of society, predatory economic, and so on. So this morning we can get a conclusion, short conclusion. The problem actually, China is a problem. Therefore, I have a question. This question has two sides. One side is from United States. How could United States convince more like-minded country or like-minded partner to do the same voice, to speak the same voice with your position at moment time? As we know, United States rethinking now your China policy and rethinking and do something in the past time. You didn't do that. Even O'Brien said that is a mistake since your engagement policy toward PRC. On the other hand, question, of course, for our EU and Australia, for both of you, are there something for your side? Could you think about that? How could you stand the same line with the United States toward the PRC? That's my one question, but two sides. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I believe Danny and Antoine, both of you, you have your question asked by two different persons. So why don't Antoine, you go first, and then Danny.
Okay, so thank you very much for the comments and the very, very interesting questions. As a European, the first thing we should say is we know what asymmetry means. We know that if you don't build up coalitions, you are doomed. And we know that multilateralism is the key. So the French and German initiative that started months ago on the Alliance of Multilateralism is actually one of the many examples that we Europeans understand that coalition of like-minded partners, of like-minded democracies is key. And that's how actually Europe can play a key role with Taiwan, including at the civil society level. Because as soon, of course, as you do it at the political level, then it gets tricky, then it gets complicated, and you have many limitations, and that's quite normal. At the civil society level, among universities, among NGOs, among think tanks, you have a lot of room to maneuver. I will take some very, very concrete examples. We should basically boost the number of European tourists and European students, especially European students, going to Taiwan and studying in Taiwan. Not only studying Chinese, studying the Taiwan politics, etc., but also studying hard sciences, physics, marine engineering, etc. This S&T, this science and technology cooperation, is also very, very important. It already exists. Europe and European countries are already key partners of many Taiwanese research institutions, but I do believe we can do even more in many, many fields, including related to climate change, related to environment, etc. We could basically initiate also at the EU level or at the member state level a maritime dialogue with Taiwan that would actually cover a broad range of issues, from economic issues, environmental issues, etc. The importance of NGOs is also key. I always repeat when I'm in Europe that Taiwan is actually, I would say, the most European or Europeanized society in Asia, especially in East Asia. The Taiwanese society is a society the Europeans relate to the most easily. Take any European tourist, any European student, any European businessman coming and visiting Taiwan, and it kind of feel like home quite easily. So that cooperation at the civil society level is key, and we, basically, as think tank, as researchers, are people from the academic, have a role to play to boost cooperation, because at the end, raising awareness, giving a voice will be the key to increase cooperation and coordination and actually promote our common interest. Because as I said before, it's not only about Taiwan interest or Taiwan security. It's also about our own European interest, European security, and that's why that partnership, that cooperation between Europe and Taiwan will be lasting and will be sustainable.
Thank you, Antoine. And then Danny, please.
Thanks. Well, that's really a great question. So I think Ambassador Koo, I'd start with all the things not to do in order to marshal a unified international front that could apply significant political and reputational pressure on the key decision maker in the CCP, Xi Jinping. My starting point would be, it's not America first. Because if others believe that the United States is selfishly looking out exclusively for its own interest, they're not going to be inclined, frankly, to align themselves. It's not just denunciation of China. It's not just diatribes. Governments want to hear a strategy for effecting change, not just a list of sins and offenses, certainly not in kind of overdrawn and histrionic terms. It's also not abandoning the WHO or other important multilateral organizations and ceding the leadership role and creating a vacuum that you know who, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party is all too ready to try to fill. It's certainly not threatening our partners and our allies with sanctions or tariffs if they don't do what we tell them to do. That's not proving to be effective, nor is abandoning treaties and commitments and agreements that previous administrations have entered into, because that teaches our friends that no agreement with the United States administration is likely to outlast that particular government. I think what it is convincing other countries that the United States stands for something in its interactions with China, that it isn't selective in singling out China's treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, but forgets entirely about its treatment of Tibetans, or turns a blind eye to the appalling human rights gulag that is North Korea and embraces its leader, calls him his best friend. The list, unfortunately, goes on from there. I think, put simply, leadership is not a matter of bossing people around. It's a matter of convincing others that they want to follow you because you are taking their interests into consideration. I think we also need, as the United States, to again convince other countries in addressing the challenges posed by China that we know what we're doing, that our approach, a collective approach, can be successful. It's a matter of competence. When people see that the US administration has made fixing the trade deficit with China its paramount objective, but 3 years later, the US trade deficit with China, trading goods deficit with China, is almost to $1 the same as it was 4 years ago. We're not exactly convincing people that we have a plan. So I don't think that the secret, Professor Koo, lies in an elegant political formula. I think it's in restoring faith among partners that the United States is capable of doing what leaders must do, which is to consult, to listen, to respect, and to act with the greater good in mind.
Right, thank you, Danny. I believe I'm instructed that we are really out of time. But I believe that we all have a very inspiring and a rich conversation in these sessions. And particularly, I believe that the issue right now, we do understand, is not that this is not about the problem in Taiwan, although the question and the security situation really did rising in the Taiwan Straits. It's actually about China, and we should not let China define the problem as it is our problem or other people's problem. Should not let China export its own frustrations, and that becomes our frustrations. So that, with that in mind, first, please join me with give a big round of applause to all our distinguished panelists for giving us a very rich discussions. And also, thank you very much. And we can all eat right now. Thank you.
Yes.